So I've been using the Alienware AW2725DF OLED monitor for a little over a month now, almost 2 months. And I said I was going to make a video going over my experience with it, switching to OLED from a TN panel, and really just using it for Valorant and using it as my main monitor. So this is that video today. I'm not really going to do a super in-depth review of OLED or like any of the like technical specs or anything like that, because there's a ton of really good videos on YouTube already that go over OLED technology and this monitor specifically. So if you want to know like all of those detailed specs, you can go and watch those videos. I'm just going to be giving my subjective experience using this monitor, mainly for really high levels of competitive Valorant and how that experience has been. So I bought the AW2725DF for around $900 Canadian. Right now the price is up again, but I got it when it was on sale. So $900 Canadian is around $650 USD. So this is definitely by no means a cheap monitor. I was either going to upgrade to this monitor like OLED, or I was going to upgrade to a Zowie 540Hz monitor. And if we look at the Zowie 540Hz monitor, it's around the same price if it's not on sale. It's $1,100 Canadian compared to the AW2725DF, which is around the same price, but again, I got it on sale. Yeah, I couldn't really justify spending like that much money on a TN panel, like a 1080p TN panel. Even though it's 540Hz, I really couldn't justify spending over $1,000 on a 1080p panel, which is why I went with the OLED. And I really have no regrets switching to an OLED monitor. A lot of common questions that I've gotten is, number one, how was the switch from 1080p to 1440p? And number two is, how was the switch from 24-inch to 27-inch? So I've been using a 1080p TN panel ever since I started PC gaming, like in 2012. So I've definitely gotten used to playing on a 24-inch monitor and 1080p. So when I first switched over to a 27-inch 1440p monitor, it was definitely a little bit jarring because it was a lot bigger than I was expecting. And honestly, I'm still not completely used to it yet, but it has definitely gotten a lot better. And like I moved my monitor back a lot more than I would with a 24-inch, which has made it a little bit easier to play on. But my main thing that I'm still not fully used to is the crosshairs, because crosshairs on 1080p are a lot different than the crosshairs on 1440p. On 1440p, all the crosshairs just look really small, and I've been having a hard time finding like a good crosshair to use on 1440p, which sounds like a really weird issue, but yeah, I've really only found like one crosshair that I like using on 1440p, which is like this little fat blurry dot. If you want to know all of my settings that I use on this monitor, I made a dedicated video going over all of my settings, like brightness and everything that I use, so I'll leave that linked in the description if you're curious. One thing that I really like switching over to 1440p is the amount of screen real estate that I have. So that's one thing that I immediately noticed is like everything looks a lot smaller on the 1440p, and I just have so much more screen real estate for productivity. And honestly, if I didn't need a second monitor for pulling up chat for when I'm streaming, like if I didn't stream, I would honestly be fine using like just this Alienware monitor as my main monitor on 1440p. Because look at this, I can have like so much stuff pulled up on a single monitor, whereas like on 1080 everything is just scaled up, obviously, because it's a lower res. So that's one thing that I really like. In terms of switching from a TN panel to an OLED panel, it's absolutely insane. I've been playing a lot of Black Myth Wukong as well as Final Fantasy 16, which you can see in the background right now. I'm using stock footage from YouTube because I didn't want to record it. A lot of people say it's like life-changing going from a TN panel to an OLED panel, and I definitely wouldn't say it's life-changing, but it's definitely noticeable, and it's a huge like quality of life thing because the viewing angles on OLED and the color accuracy on OLED is just so much better than my TN panel. That's one thing I really like about OLED as well, is the color accuracy. So now when I do photo editing and video editing, like if I'm doing productivity stuff, the OLED panel is really good for that. I just switch it over to the sRGB mode. And yeah, if you want to look at like the color gamut and how much of the sRGB space it actually covers, you can look up all those stats. But from what I've seen, the Alienware is rated pretty highly for color accuracy, which is really nice. I do find that it's a little bit oversaturated in the standard profile, but I actually like that for Valorant because when I'm playing Valorant, I used to turn up the saturation on my TN monitor anyways. So on my OLED panel, since the standard profile is already oversaturated a little bit, I actually don't need to adjust any color settings when I play Valorant. So I actually found that really nice. And yeah, so obviously for single player games, it's an incredible experience, especially with HDR. I don't use HDR that often. And so the cool thing about OLED is that there's pretty much zero ghosting because the response time is pretty much instant. And so when I've been playing Valorant, I've really noticed that the motion clarity is insanely good. Like if I'm just swiping left to right super fast, there's pretty much no blur on my screen whatsoever. Like obviously there's motion blur, but there isn't any like ghosting or trailing behind anything. And obviously this monitor is 360 Hz and my computer can easily push out that frame rate pretty consistently. So that helps a lot as well with the motion clarity. And the thing with TN panels is if you're going with a Zowie TN panel with a DIAC, you will have better motion clarity with DIAC enabled on a Zowie monitor, assuming they're both the same refresh rate. The TN panel with strobing will have better motion clarity, but when I actually had my Zowie monitor, I didn't even use DIAC because DIAC actually irritated my eyes, so I didn't even use the strobing feature. So switching from like my Zowie monitor to the OLED panel, DIAC wasn't really a factor that I took into consideration when I was switching because I didn't use it regardless. But honestly, even if I did use DIAC, I think the trade-off of OLED's instant response times is actually better than the DIAC on the TN panels. Like I'd rather have the better color accuracy, better viewing angles, and the instant response time, so like virtually no ghosting on the OLED panel compared to the slightly better motion clarity of a strobed TN panel, which is why I ultimately chose to go with OLED. And even now there's like a 480Hz 1440p OLED panel that's out on the market, the Asus one and also the Sony one. Obviously those monitors are extremely expensive, but 480Hz OLED pretty much is like on par with the motion clarity of a strobed TN panel. So if money is really not an issue for you, you can just go with like a 480Hz OLED panel, assuming your computer can push out that many frames. And you're pretty much getting like the same motion clarity compared to a TN panel nowadays. So in my opinion, in 2024, there's really no reason to go for a TN panel, even if you're like a super sweaty competitive FPS player like I am. I feel like OLED is just superior in almost every way. Like obviously I've hit top 500 Radiant and I'm consistently in the top 1% of Valorant players, and I feel like I've been playing a lot better on OLED than I ever was on my old TN panel. So yeah, I've been feeling really good using the Alienware OLED panel. I feel like my shots and my reaction time have been just the same, if not better, than I was on the TN panel. But obviously, not everything is perfect, so I want to talk a little bit about the flaws of this monitor that I've had and some issues that have come up. Number one, this is a non-issue for me, but it's something that a lot of people bring up when they talk about OLED, and that's obviously burn-in. So with OLED panels and OLED technology, if you leave static elements on the screen, you have a risk of that burning into the screen just because of how OLED works. This is a non-issue for me because number one, I have a 3-year warranty on my monitor. Dell gives you a 3-year warranty for burn-in, so if you do get like any signs of burn-in, that's covered under the Dell warranty within 3 years. And even if I'm outside of the 3-year warranty period, I see myself upgrading my monitor, you know, like 4 or 5 years from now. So that's really a non-issue for me in terms of burn-in. I do use a black, like completely black wallpaper, and I also hide my taskbar, but I also did that before I even switched to OLED. Well, I didn't hide my taskbar, but I used a completely black desktop background. Nothing has really changed in terms of that. The second issue I've experienced is slight flickering, and this has nothing to do with variable refresh rate because I have G-Sync turned off in NVIDIA control panel. I don't use variable refresh rate at all when I'm playing Valorant. But the flickering is only noticeable when I play Valorant, and it's like a very slight flickering that I would barely even notice if I wasn't super dialed in. And I really only notice it when I'm using scoped weapons like an operator or a marshal or an outlaw or something like that. So when I'm scoped in and I'm just focused on one point, just staring at my screen, I do notice that there's a little bit of flickering on the monitor, which is not an issue that I had on my TN panel. But again, it's like a very subtle flickering and it doesn't really bother me at all. It's just something that I notice when I'm using a scoped gun. The next thing you might want to consider is QD OLED versus W OLED, and you can watch other videos or just Google to do your own research on the difference between the two. But the monitor that I have, the Alienware one, is a QD OLED panel. QD OLED is a little bit more sensitive to ambient light, so if you have like direct light hitting the screen, there is a purplish hue to QD OLED, and it does raise the black levels a little bit if you have ambient light just hitting directly on the screen. This is really a non-issue for me because I do see the purple hue sometimes, especially if I have my window like curtain open and the sun is shining in. But as soon as I'm like playing a game or watching any sort of content, that really becomes not really that noticeable. So it's really a non-issue for me. But you can avoid that entirely with W OLED. I believe the new 480Hz OLED monitors are W OLED, and they have a semi-matte coating. So that's not really an issue if you go with those monitors. The next issue, and this is the biggest one, the first 2 weeks that I got the monitor, it was working fine. And then all of a sudden I had this issue where my monitor got stuck in a burn-in test cycle. So it actually got to the point where I made a Reddit post on this issue. I posted it to Reddit trying to get a solution. And you can even find my Reddit post. I'll leave it linked in the description. But basically, long story short, I stepped away from my computer, came back, tried to power on my monitor, and it got stuck in a burn-in cycle where it would just flash between like the primary colors and black, white, gray. And there was really no way to get out of it. I tried power cycling the monitor. I tried actually doing a firmware update on the monitor, like just reflashing the firmware. Tried to leave it unplugged overnight pretty much, and nothing really fixed the issue. I tried different ports on the monitor, pretty much everything, and nothing fixed it. So in the end, I actually had to exchange the monitor for a replacement. And this isn't really an issue with OLED. This is probably just an issue with this specific model, because I did Google the problem, and it seems like there was several other people with this monitor specifically that have had this issue, and they all had to exchange it for an RMA, like a replacement. I obviously exchanged it for a replacement unit, and so far it's been working fine. It's been like almost a month now on this new one, and it's been fine so far. So fingers crossed. I think it's probably just going to be fine and I had a defective unit, but that is definitely something to keep in mind because it was pretty concerning. So if you are looking at picking up this specific OLED monitor, then that's something to keep in mind. One more thing to note is that this monitor does have a glossy coating, and this applies to every monitor with a glossy coating, but I've never had a monitor with a glossy coating until now. If I sneeze and I don't like turn away from my monitor or cover my mouth, or I'm like coughing or something, there's actually like particles that end up sticking to your monitor, and you have to use a microfiber cloth with some distilled water preferably. I just use tap water though, to be honest, because I can't be bothered. But I just use tap water and a microfiber cloth and wipe my monitor every now and then, and those little spots will come off. I actually had someone come into my Discord server who got this monitor, and they had these spots on their monitor and they thought their monitor was broken. And this is actually a common issue that I see on Reddit. A lot of people post the little bubbles on their monitor and they think that their monitor is broken, but it's actually just like spit. So all you really need to do is just get like a microfiber cloth and some water. But yeah, that's one thing that was pretty interesting. And yeah, overall, that's pretty much been my experience with the monitor. So yeah, one more issue that some people have with OLED monitors is the brightness, because OLED monitors don't get as bright as your typical TN panels or IPS panels. This hasn't really been an issue for me. I don't find that I need my monitor super bright. When I first got it, it did feel a little bit too dim. I think that's because I came from a TN panel and I ran my TN panel pretty bright. But after like a couple weeks of using the OLED monitor on 70% brightness, I've gotten used to it and the brightness is perfectly fine for me now. So I think it's just a matter of getting used to the brightness. I also don't play in like a super bright environment. I do have my room light on, but that's about it. Part of that does depend on how much lighting you have in your area. But yeah, right now I'm playing with the monitor at 70% brightness, and for me, that's bright enough. But yeah, that was pretty much it, guys. That was my experience switching over to an OLED monitor and using it as my main display. Overall, I really enjoy using an OLED monitor, and it's been one of the best upgrades I've done to my setup so far. Like, you can upgrade your PC all you want and get as many frames as you want, but at the end of the day, you're really just seeing everything through your monitors. So yeah, upgrading to that higher resolution and the better panel has really just been a game changer for me. But yeah, that's pretty much it, guys. I hope this video helps, and if you enjoyed it, make sure you leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.